The top pros you see regularly crushing the DFS lobby have a few key understandings of the game that other players lack that allows them to be so successful. But here's the secret. These things are not about being better at picking players or identifying the top stack of the slate or what projections they're using. There is a core difference in mindset that top players share that allows them to be so successful. My name's Jordan Chand, I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and as a DFS coach, I've had the opportunity to talk with hundreds of different DFS players all across the spectrum of DFS experience level, from daily pros to brand new players. And in this video, I'll walk through the top 3 core ideas that all top players grasp and incorporate into their daily processes to help you level up and take the next step in your DFS journey. Whether you're already a profitable player looking to level up further, or new to the game and seeking your first big win, I promise there will be something for you to pick up here. So let's go ahead and dive in. My first item on this list is understanding what the range of outcomes for profit looks like on any given slate, and setting realistic expectations of success. The idea that the top DFS players win every night, or even most nights they play, is a myth propagated to sell player picks. The idea that a good player can or should be winning every night they play is simply false, and believing this can lead you to playing in a suboptimal way. You can already intuit this just by looking at the payout structures of DFS tournaments alone. The cash line for most of these tournaments is generally between the top 20 to 30% of the tournament, but min-cashing tournament lineups isn't enough to be profitable in DFS. Doubling up your entry fee for finishing the top 20% of the field is a bad rate of return, and the real profit comes from outlier outcomes of placing in the top 1 or even top 0.1% of a contest. But it is important to set realistic expectations of how often these outcomes will happen. The best players might place 1.5% of their lineups in the top 1% of a contest on average, outpacing the average expectation of 1% of their lineups in the top 1%, and that is probably enough to be an immensely profitable DFS player. But these outcomes themselves are still only going to happen 1.5% of the time, and even a top 1% finish might not be a big season-defining win in a large field tournament. There are 2 key ideas here that need to be internalized. The first is that the payout structures of these contests dictate that our profitability in tournaments come almost entirely from outlier top 0.1% finishes. And second, that these outcomes are by definition rare, even among players that are achieving them significantly more often than the average player. I have 2 data points to back this up. First, when developing our DFS profit plan, our guide to contest selection and bankroll management, we ran thousands of bankroll simulations of profitable, positive ROI players to see what the swings of DFS look like. We found that the average player with a 10% ROI should expect to only profit, not finish first in a tournament, not have a top 0.1% outcome, but just end up in the green at all about 6 days a month playing every single day. Furthermore, approximately 90% of the profit achieved by this player on the average season came on just 1 or 2 slates out of the entire year. And second, our contest flashback tool that takes the real lineups played in a past contest and resimulates the results 100,000 times will show you that the average expectation of the most profitable players is always losing money on the slate. This checks out with our bankroll simulations and our understanding of the payout structures of the contests, and implies that breaking even on a slate is probably around the 80th percentile outcome, something that you should only expect about 20% of the time. So where does the profit come from in DFS? The 99th percentile outcomes shown in contest flashback show exactly what the big nights look like, but you should be playing with an awareness that these are inherently rare and take a large sample size to reliably achieve. This is the single biggest difference I've observed between top players and novice DFS players. If your expectation is to see nights in the green most nights you play, you are approaching the game the wrong way. Not only is this a perfect recipe for mental tilt, but you might also end up playing worse lineups if you are optimizing to see min cashes often instead of seeking first place, where your real potential profitability lies. In terms of practical takeaways here, the main thing is sound bankroll management. To realize top 1% outcomes, you need to play a lot of entries across a lot of different slates, which means you need to be able to stabilize your bankroll to stay in the game night after night. Our DFS profit plan, which is linked in the description of this video if you haven't seen it, recommends players play 2.5 to 5% of their bankroll per slate, and the larger your bankroll is, the lower I'd set that percentage for your play. You should also be trying to play as many different unique lineups into as many entries as possible on a given slate to increase your sample size, which means focusing on the low stakes contests first before jumping up in stakes. Secondly, you need a way to verify that you're on the right track with your lineups. Knowing that the average expectation of even a profitable player is to lose money most nights makes it hard to know if you're playing well at all. This is where contest flashback can be extra valuable. By re-simulating a slate 100,000 times, we mitigate the variance of what took place on the field in the single outcome that actually happened. We can then verify that we played in a way where we had a positive expected value, even if at the end of the slate we lost money. I check my lineups in contest flashback every single day I play DFS to make sure I had a positive sim average profit, or sim ROI, which represents the amount of money I would have made had the slate played out 100,000 times. This, combined with sound bankroll management, lets me play enough slates to achieve that profit over the long term when the 99th percentile slate ultimately ends up coming up. But to have these positive expected values, we need to make sure we're actually playing strong lineups into our contests, which brings me to my second item on my list, which is understanding the correct balance of projection, ownership, and correlation for the specific contest you're playing. These are essentially the three levers that we can pull to change the constructions of our lineups. The overall projection of a lineup is the fundamental building block. Correlations let us maximize the upside of as many parts of our lineup as possible when we're right, and ownership gives us a relative advantage on the field by making it so fewer of our opponent's lineups share the points we're scoring. But these different factors are often in conflict with one another. The field is directionally accurate with identifying the best plays on the slate, so we often have to sacrifice projection to get lower owned players. Stacking up teams or games also requires us to sacrifice projections and can sometimes lead us to playing combinations of players that are very likely to be combined together in our opponent's lineups, raising our combinatorial ownership of those players. To make things more complicated, the extent to which we value these different factors varies dramatically based on the contest we're playing. In larger field, top-heavier contests, it becomes more and more important for us to maximize upside and our first place equity, leading us to want to play less owned, more highly correlated lineups, sacrificing the necessary projections to get there. But to what extent? Exactly how much projection, ownership, and correlation should we look for in our lineups for each contest we're playing? Most DFS tools are no help on their own to solve this puzzle. Traditional optimizers assume a player scores their average 100% of the time, assumes players are all completely independent and uncorrelated to each other, and that ownership is a non-factor. Incorporating these components of upside requires the user to program all the rules and settings to account for them. The top players have figured out exactly how to balance these factors, and they're generally split into two different buckets. The first is players that have spent literally thousands of hours perfecting their craft with a traditional optimizer, using heuristics to create highly specific sets of optimizer rules and their own custom calculations to determine if a lineup meets the right criteria. These magic settings need to be reprogrammed for each slate and contest, and a ton of time needs to be put in to make sure that the specific nuances of that particular slate are covered. And the other is players that have built their own custom contest simulations that directly solve for lineup profitability. Now, SaberSim levels the playing field for you to be able to solve this puzzle in your lineups with our play-by-play game simulations and contest simulations. Here's a step-by-step explanation of how it works. First, when we build lineups on SaberSim, instead of just optimizing by average projections, we are sampling actual game scripts from our game simulations and building the best possible lineup for a given way that the slate could play out. This does two things. First, it means your lineups account for the real upside of players, because for a player to enter your lineup, it means they had an upside outcome in that sim, and it also accounts for the correlation of players, because if Patrick Mahomes enters your lineup, it's likely that other Chiefs succeeded in that sim. Players appear in your lineup pool approximately at the rate they appear in the winning lineup, and they are stacked and correlated with their teammates or opponents at the rate at which those constructions are optimal. When you run a contest sim on these lineups, we take each lineup in your 5,000 lineup pool, compete it in a simulated version of the contest you're playing that slate using the payout structure and the expected field we expect you'll be competing against, and run that simulation 100,000 times. This accounts for ownership in the optimal way. Lineups with high projections but high ownership will score well more often in the sim, but jump fewer lineups in your competition when they go off. And lineups with lower projections and lower ownership will score highly less often, but get more relative advantage when they get there. By assigning the exact payout structures from the actual contest you're playing, we can calculate the ROI of each lineup directly, accounting for the unique payout structure in that contest and the unique lineups your opponents are likely to play. The best DFS players have had this puzzle solved for years with either a battle-tested, heuristical approach on traditional optimizers or their own custom-developed sims. But with SaberSim's contest sims, there is no excuse for not taking advantage of this massive edge you can get by playing lineups perfectly optimized for the contest you're playing. If you've already nailed these two tips, you'll likely be playing a large portfolio of lineups well optimized for the contest that you're entering. But this brings me to the final item on my list, which is thinking about your lineups for a slate as an investment portfolio. Because so much of the contest equity is in the top 0.1% of the finishing positions, we want to have as many strong, unique shots on that top 0.1%. Firing 150 bullets from the exact same angle doesn't help us because we can't win first place 150 times. But making those 150 lineups diversified and different from each other means that we're less likely to totally brick a slate, meaning our bankroll stays more stable, letting us take more shots again tomorrow, while also meaning each of our shots are taken from a different angle, opening the door for us to have that 0.1% lineup for a wider range of outcomes of what might take place on the field that particular slate. One of the top things I see DFS players surprised most by when they first start using SaberSim is how diversified you can actually get while still playing profitable lineups. The idea of using a core of players and rotating a bunch of other players around them, or heavily limiting your player pool before building lineups, is a relic of an earlier era of DFS where projection models were significantly less sophisticated than they are today. It made sense as a strategy at the time to identify a handful of strong plays and to try to make as many lineups as possible built around that core, when it was much harder to identify the strong plays and much harder to build good lineups. It was a simple approach at the time to say, lineups containing these players are likely to be good, so I'm going to play as many combinations of them as possible. But these highly concentrated portfolios are extremely high variance, and if you've used this strategy, you're probably aware of how bad this can end up when all 150 of your lineups are totally dead the moment a player in your core has a bad game. But while projection systems and DFS content have improved significantly over the years, letting us see a wider range of what possible profitable lineups might look like, the tools traditional optimizers provide to try to actively diversify your portfolio of lineups haven't improved at all. Again, traditional optimizers assume that players score their average projection 100% of the time, which is very obviously not the case, and as such, building 150 lineups on a traditional optimizer will lead to 150 extremely similar lineups. These tools require you to use blunt tools like min or max exposures and min unique set pre-build to try to diversify. But the problem with these approaches is that they actively make your lineups worse. These restrictions affect the way that lineups themselves can be built. A min unique setting of 3, for example, is incredibly limiting on the way your 150th lineup is built when it needs to be 3 players different than all 149 lineups built before it. A global max exposure of 50% means that your 76th lineup is going to look very different than your 75th lineup when a bunch of players all hit their 50% exposure cap at the exact same time. But this doesn't mean we should ignore diversification completely. You just need tools that allow you to play a diversified portfolio without sacrificing lineup quality. The ease of playing a well-diversified, profitable portfolio of lineups on SaberSim comes back to our methodology for how our lineups are built and managed. Your 5,000 lineup pool is sampling our play-by-play simulations of each game on the slate. Each lineup you get in your pool is the best possible GPP lineup for an entirely different way this slate can play out. So while we're already diversifying more than a traditional optimizer here, we haven't sacrificed our lineup quality. In fact, we've ensured it. We know these lineups have upside because they banked the slate simulation that they were built from. From there, either SaberScore, a custom algorithm designed to calculate the quality of a lineup, or our contest sim, a direct calculation of the expected ROI of a lineup, lets us sort these lineups by their profitability. At this point, we're becoming more confident of the quality of these lineups played into our contests. And now, and only now, we can diversify with min uniques. This is a crucial difference between SaberSim and other tools and a huge factor in how this all works. After identifying this massive pool of profitable candidate lineups, we can use min uniques to select a subset that is appropriately diverse. Where traditional optimizers force you to make a sacrifice in the way lineups are built to achieve diversity, SaberSim simply assembles a massive pool of profitable options and identifies a diversified set from among them to play. I typically recommend setting min uniques to 1 less than the maximum you can in the SaberSim app while still getting the number of lineups you need for the slate. After having done this, you'll generally see a reasonably flat portfolio of players across your lineup set, matching up to how the top 150 maxers assemble their portfolios when reviewing in our contest flashback tool. This is how top players protect their investments over the course of many slates, and also how they protect against unexpected results from completely tanking any given slate, whether it's an injury or a post-lock scratch on the field, or a sudden extreme change in actual ownership versus expected ownership in the DFS contests. Playing these diversified portfolios really ties everything together here. It allows you to more sustainably manage your bankroll while also making sure you're covering as much ground across the possible range of outcomes as you can. There are certainly still successful players playing concentrated portfolios in 2024, but the vast majority of names you'll see at the top of our contest flashback sim ROI night after night have mastered the art of diversification. Now, we've covered a lot here today, so let me quickly summarize the 3 top core secrets that will help make you a DFS expert. First, understand the range of outcomes and set realistic expectations for each slate you play. Second, balance the 3 competing levers of projection, ownership, and correlation adjusted for the specific contest you're playing. And 3, think about and diversify your lineups like an investment portfolio. These 3 concepts will have you well on your way to becoming a better DFS player. But if you're jamming MLB DFS like I am this summer, you can go even further. I put together my list of my top 5 tips to beat MLB DFS this season. 5 strategies you can steal that are designed to exploit specific edges I've noticed in my play and research for the 2024 season. You can check out that video here and make sure to subscribe to our channel to be notified every time I release a new video. Good luck and see you soon.